Whichever culture is most foreign to your own obviously has all the answers. On this episode, I interview a former Eastern Orthodox priest on his journey out of Eastern Orthodoxy, the rise of the Orthobro, and the false masculine appeal of Orthodoxy. So join us as we build, fight, protect, and lead. This is the Patriarchy.
Rise up, for men of God, have done with lesser. Rise up, for men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind, soul and strength, and serve the King of Kings. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod. As brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God.
I'm amazed that you're so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another. Only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed. As we have said before, so I say again now, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to what you have received, he is to be accursed. That was Galatians 1, 6 through 9, and you're listening to the Patriarchy Podcast on Roundtable Media, a ministry of Sovereign King Church. I am Pastor Joseph Spurgeon, and it is a pleasure to be back with you today. You know, it's been a couple of weeks since we last released a new episode, and that's because I was in Israel. I've been there for the last week and a half with a group of men. We preached the gospel throughout the entire country, and man, what a blessed time it was. Not only getting to see and be in the actual locations recorded in Holy Scripture, but getting to preach the gospel in the open air, in those exact locations, preaching the name of Jesus in the place where he stood. We preached in the city gates of Jerusalem, Nazareth, Galilee, Bethlehem, and at a pride event to 300,000 people in Tel Aviv. We handed out thousands of tracts, had gospel conversations with Jews, Muslims, and even Christians. And there's a whole lot I want to report to you about this trip, and I'm going to be doing that on an upcoming episode. But there is something that really stuck out to me that will be helpful to say as we start this episode. There are a lot of really beautiful church buildings in Israel. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was something I was super excited to see. And then there was like the Church of All Nations and on and on. Beautiful, ancient architecture. There were art from the time of the Crusades in the building, mosaics and paintings. There were buildings built into the side of mountains, like a monastery called the Monastery of St. George. Or there was a monastery on the Mount of Temptation in Jericho, which you had to take a trolley up the mountain to get to it. I am a sucker for architecture. I love old church buildings. I love cathedrals. And I also love that these buildings commemorate the historical sites of Christ's work or the work of some faithful follower of Christ. Yet, with all this beauty, there was a great issue that I noticed. And that's because the priests and the monks and the leaders in these churches operated more like museum curators than officers of God's church. One of the things that I took away from this trip was just how the religion in Israel, and in particular in Jerusalem, was very external. So external, whether it was the Jews, the Muslims, or sadly the Christians. External without much internal change. The Orthodox priests performed ceremonies that tourists watch, and in one place they even posed for a photo during the ritual. They sold trinkets in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. One of the priests, that was his job, and he was not very happy about it. He was a pretty rude cuss. They didn't proclaim the gospel to those who came in. They did some ceremonies, there were incense, and they sang, but no preaching of the gospel, no preaching even of the law of God. And therefore, really no influence on the culture of Israel to be had from these churches. It all had the appearance of beauty. The form of godliness was there, but no substance. I say this because we live in a time when our own culture in the West is decaying. Perversion is celebrated and taking over. The ungodly have worked to erode confidence in the West and in all of our systems. Feminism, effeminacy have harmed the family. We can even go back. We look at the Industrial Revolution and even more recently, the tech revolution. It's put many men at a disadvantage. Young men are rootless. They are adrift. Women enter the college way more than men, and men are hurting right now. Men want something, though, that will last throughout this. And when you're facing all the forces that are eroding out the foundations around you, you want something that has stood the test of time. Men want something with roots, roots that go into the past. They want something that has weathered many storms and will stand firm in the current storm. And so some men, fed up with the weak and feckless religion of many modern evangelical churches, have begun to turn to Eastern Orthodoxy. The Eastern Orthodox Church claims to be the one true church that Christ established, and it claims to be unchanged and thus unchangeable. It also has the aura of being foreign to our own Western culture. There's a mystique to it. Something about a culture being foreign to yours makes it you think that, well, there must be some truth in that, especially when your culture seems to be collapsing. Rod Dreher, in a blog post, he made these remarks about orthodoxy. Quote, "One theme I have heard consistently from both evangelical men and Catholic men who convert to Eastern Orthodoxy is that they are sick of the feminization of their former churches. These men haven't been macho or troglodytic, at least not as far as I could tell. They just hate being told week in, week out that traditional masculine characteristics are harmful or otherwise unwanted. Some of them don't like being led by priests they take to be soft men, not necessarily gay, but oriented more towards pastoring in a feminine style." He goes on to say, "I can't explain why Orthodoxy is more accommodating of masculinity, but it is. There's a lot that is soft in Orthodox worship, but I think the difference is that the moralistic, therapeutic, deist attitude that Christianity is supposed to be about niceness and personal happiness is radically alien to Orthodoxy. It's not that Orthodox spirituality is gloomy, but rather that it is serious and demanding and doesn't seek to sanctify secular therapeutic strategies. It's about healing the soul, all right, but not in the way of the world and of too many churches." Dreher is not the only one to notice this movement. There are a group of primarily younger men, which some have called Orthobros, who have left evangelicalism and Roman Catholicism and joined the Eastern Church looking for substance. They have a little community online. In fact, there's been a few events that I've even gone to. We've gone to some pro-life events, and I've seen a little group of what I would call Orthobros, dressed in black, waving black flags and flags with Cairo and other Eastern symbology. But here's the question. Are these Orthobros actually finding what they're looking for? Is the Eastern Orthodox Church actually the answer that we need? Is it really ancient and unchanging? Is it really the religion of Christ? Does it give life? Or is it more like what I experienced in Israel? To find out, I interviewed conservative Anglican pastor Matthew Joyner on this phenomenon. He was an Eastern Orthodox priest before converting to the Protestant faith. I asked him about his journey into the Eastern Church and his journey out of it. And in this interview, he gives me the good, the bad, and the ugly. So listen in. I think you're going to be challenged. Welcome back to the Patriarchy Podcast. I'm here with Matthew Joyner. He is the pastor of Reformation Anglican Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is a former Eastern Orthodox priest. He was a priest for 5 years. He hosts a podcast called Taproot Faith. He also used to play music professionally in a group called Drowning Jonah. You may have heard of them.
Among others.
And among others. And he's been married for 12 years, has 3 children, and he is part of the Patriarchy. So welcome to the Patriarchy.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Matthew, how do I get one of those cool dresses that you Anglicans wear?
Well, you have to ask some nice lady to stitch it for you and make sure the hem's right. So, too long is, shows off too much. Too short shows off too much leg. So you have to make sure that you get it to your ankles. So.
Well, welcome, and it's good to have you, brother.
Good to be here.
Why don't you tell our listeners, you were in the Eastern Orthodox Church. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on the show was there's a lot of young men. They're looking for, I would say, fatherhood. They're looking for masculinity, I guess, stability and tradition. So many of them have turned to Eastern Orthodox. You have the Orthobros.
Yeah.
So you were one of them. You were one of the Eastern Orthodox. I don't know if you were one of the Orthobros, but you were one of the Eastern Orthodox. How did you get into that? Were you born into that, or
No. So I grew up basically Baptist-costal in Kentucky. Southern Baptist as a kid, Assemblies of God in my teens. Was into that whole '90s Christian music, charismatic revival scene. And around the time I graduated high school, I started getting interested in church history. And ultimately there was another issue where I was sitting in the back of the church during a revival at my Assembly of God church. You've ever been to one of those, you know what that's like. They go on for
every head bowed.
Oh yeah.
Every eye bowed and every head closed.
Right. But also after like the sixth hour and where the band is basically tired and we're all sitting in the back while the CD plays, kind of thing. And I kind of picked up my Bible they gave me for a graduation gift, and I said, I've been in the church since utero. I should probably read this thing. And as I'm reading through Acts, especially, which is what charismatics like to, at least back then, like to hover over, there was just kind of this, I felt a disconnect. And so I started to wonder about what the history of the church really looked like. So that kind of led me on a journey that ultimately was around a decade, all through my 20s, kind of studying, got into theology really hardcore when I was working for a church here in Cincinnati, a Presbyterian church. I was working there as music director. And a former pastor there was this cat named R.C. Sproul.
Wow, nice.
And I had no idea who the heck he was. But some of the people there said, "Hey, you should," I was asking questions, and they'd say, "Oh, well, R.C. wrote about this, or R.C. wrote about that. Read this, listen to this podcast." And very quickly, R.C. became my hero, and he remains so. You can see I have him prominently displayed behind me here. But so that got me into studying theology and then further into church history. Well, the problem was that as I got older and I'm working for different churches in the main line, I was butting up against the issue of a lot of liberalism that was happening. And for me as a 20-something, what I've really had to come to deal with over the course of the last few years is that what had kind of happened to me was that I more or less made conservatism as an idea an idol. And so it wasn't, basically conservatism as a concept had supplanted gospel truth as my object of pursuit. And so I went running for what I thought was the most conservative option. And I found myself in this little Eastern Orthodox church on the north end of Cincinnati, about 20 minutes from where I live now. And they gave me a home. They gave me love. The priest there was a wonderful guy who spent a lot of time answering all of my asinine questions, and and I ended up becoming Orthodox. And in 2013, we got shipped off to seminary, and went to seminary in Pennsylvania. And I ended up in the last year of seminary, I got ordained to the priesthood, and ended up staying in Eastern PA and ministering in parishes there. So that's kind of how I got there. So.
Yeah. Well, when you say you made conservatism your idol, what do you? So did you find conservatism in Eastern Orthodoxy?
Well, I'll start with what I mean by making conservatism an idol.
Yeah.
So I was working simultaneously planting a church, helping plant a church as the music director with a pastor on the Kentucky side of the river. So here in Cincinnati, we're real close. We're real close to the river, and so I'm from Northern Kentucky, and so we were planting a church there with the newly formed Anglican Church in North America, the denomination I belong to now. While at the same time I was also music directing for a church that was a PCUSA Presbyterian church, and it was during that time where the PCUSA was removing their requirements for marital fidelity from their pastors. It's like, so, okay, we know where that's going. And then in the ACNA, I was, having issues with, women ordained women were getting grandfathered in from the Episcopal Church when the ACNA was formed and all that kind of thing. And so I was really struggling with those and a bunch of other issues that I thought were liberal. And which, I mean, they are, let's be fair.
Yeah.
But so for me, it was this, for me at the time, there wasn't a stand and fight and dig your heels in the ground and make your stand because the tradition that you have is beautiful and it's worth fighting for. It was, it was more like, I got to get the heck out of here and find the most conservative option so that I don't have to fight.
Okay.
I'm gonna go hide under the banner of my conservative idol, so I don't have to fight, basically. So really, it was partially making conservatism the idol, but also giving into the fight or flight, the flight side of that, because I just didn't want to be bothered with confrontation at the time, honestly. And so I went and I found a home in Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, to the question of whether it's as conservative as it seems, the short answer is no. So there is a great deal of conservative things in terms of cultural conservatism within Eastern Orthodoxy. So, walk into an Orthodox church and try to change something, and you will soon get a lit incense, censer thrown at your head. But in terms of other kinds of conservatism, in terms of like social conservatism, there's huge swaths of the Orthodox Church are actually very progressive. So actually, it was a big thing last year where the head of the Greek Orthodox Church in America, who is technically the highest ranking Orthodox cleric in America, celebrated a double baptism for two children of a same-sex married couple. And this was really heavily publicized. You've got, I know clergy who are very pro LGBTQ plus whatever. I know others who are outright Marxists. I know, which especially in a church that suffered under persecution by communists, I don't understand how that's possible, but they're there. So the reality is that under the surface of the veneer of conservatism is really a great deal of social liberalism that exists and is tolerated. So yeah.
All right. Well, we'll probably I'm going to come back to that,
Sure.
but let's. So we talked about how you got involved in the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
What would you say your overall experience as a priest was?
I mean, it really depends on like anything else, it depends on what context you're looking at. So, in terms of the people, largely speaking, the people that I interacted with, my congregation, my parishioners, were lovely. You have problems like anywhere else, but and I had a bishop in the Orthodox Church who was a wonderful guy. I still miss him a lot. Actually, he was a great guy. He was a guy who converted to Orthodoxy while studying at Oral Roberts University, if you can believe that one or not.
Oh wow!
And just was a really good, solid guy who loved his people, and but then there was also the thing that really smacked me right in the face right away, getting out into the parish, is realizing that you're dealing with just countless people. I mean, you can guarantee that when you walk into a parish, 98% of the people are going to be uncatechized, like completely uncatechized. So you walk in with a great deal of work to do. And you meet a lot of resistance if you dare to try to teach them, So that's an issue. But beyond that kind of thing, we were generally speaking treated really well. So it wasn't terrible, as far as ministering as a priest. It was pretty decent, actually.
But what was so you're no longer East Orthodox priest, so there must be some reason for that.
Yeah.
What was like the kind of one thing that got you started?
Well, the one thing is the difficult part, because for me, some people have a one issue. Some people have for some people it's like, oh, they ordain women, I'm out of here. For me with Orthodoxy, my issue with Orthodoxy is that it died the death of 1,000 cuts for me. It wasn't any one big issue. It was 10,000 little things that all, if you cut it long enough, it bleeds to death. If you cut it enough, it bleeds to death. And so, but one of the big things for me, there were 3 issues in seminary that I was really starting to struggle with. It was already while I was in seminary. I was asking questions. The first was I could not for the life of me understand why the Orthodox Church holds the view that it does toward penal substitutionary atonement theory, which is basically an outright rejection of it. I know some clergy who go so far as to call PSA a heresy.
Wow.
And actually my friend Joshua Shuping, who we've talked about, he's been on Gavin Ortland's show, and he's been on some other shows. He's actually written a book about this, about the penal substitution in the Fathers, just demonstrating it clearly. But the Eastern Church has kind of taken this line that you actually hear a lot of modern liberal theologians use, which is that, oh, that's divine child abuse. We don't believe in that. We actually believe that what happened on the cross was that Christ voluntarily entered death for us to destroy death from the inside. So Christus Victor, basically, the Christus Victor model, which is fine.
Yep.
I don't have any problem with that. That's perfectly orthodox. But that's not the whole scheme of what happened.
That's part of the atonement, but not all of it. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, I've said before that there are 4 major atonement theories, PSA, Christus Victor, ransom theory, recapitulation theory. And I have said many times, at the very least, because we worship an infinite God, at the very least, some of all of those has to be right, right? Part of each of those has to have happened. We can't just, but we can't deny the fact that the dominant view rides in the PSA view. You can't just, and without the PSA view, the entire Old Testament sacrificial system doesn't make any sense at all. Which is really what I was starting to butt up against. I started to ask the question, if penal substitution isn't the main thing we're supposed to really be looking at here, or at least put a lot more weight on it than we are, then what in the world were all those sacrifices about? What was all that blood about in the Old Testament? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There was that. Then there was the question that I had about praying for the dead. Because the Orthodox Church insists on praying for the dead. You must, from the moment somebody dies, you have a special service that's called a panikhida. You pray for them on the 3rd day after they die, the 9th day after they die, the 40th day after they die, and then every year on the anniversary of their death. And in each of these services, you're explicitly asking God to forgive them of their sins and to give them entrance into heaven. Well, the question that I had was, if we don't believe in purgatory, which the Orthodox are adamant that they don't, what's the point in praying for them?
Yeah,
Right.
Where are they that you need to pray for them so they can get somewhere else?
Exactly. And then you have a theory called the toll houses, which we can get into some other time if you want to. But but the question is, if there's not purgatory that you're praying people out of, what's the point? Okay. Then there's the issue of original sin, which they also do not believe in. At least not the way that the Western Church has historically defined it, along with original guilt. They don't believe that. They hold to what they call ancestral sin. So you receive mortality rather than a sinful nature. So in reality, in the East, they view the fall as not being as bad as the West, and especially Calvinists view it as. So they would deny total depravity completely. So
are they're Pelagian essentially? Then,
I would say so,
Okay.
or riding the hard line between semi and full Pelagian. Yeah. So those things were probably the three big issues. Later on, after I got out of school, I would and was in a parish and had time to look at things on my own. And of course, all these questions were just kind of creeping in while I was in seminary, and I was asking questions. And even though I was struggling, I was being told, just trust the church. The church is bigger than you. The church is it's older than the rest of us. Just trust the church. Lean into the church. You'll be okay. And so I did that, and I leaned into it. I submitted to ordination, went through the whole thing, but once I was out and I was free I had all this time on my hands in an empty church most of the week because I was full time. I was able to study and read and pursue resources and pursue questions where they went. And I really dived back into Scripture, which wasn't as heavily emphasized in seminary. It was more liturgy, church fathers, that kind of thing in seminary. So, and that is a dangerous thing. Getting back into Scripture is a dangerous thing. And it led me kind of down the path of, like, Marian devotion is not in the Scripture. Praying for the dead is not in the Scripture. These are things that we have no warrant to do. And all of these tiny cuts just snowballed until I got to the point where I just said, it wasn't just negative. It wasn't just what the church is saying is wrong. There was also, what does the Bible say? And I remember one day I went up to my wife, came up from my office to my wife, and I said, "Honey, I think I'm a Calvinist again." And she kind of looked at me with this, like, what? And so we actually, we sat down together, and we didn't do anything right away. We actually sat down together and we went through the New Testament line by line together for a year. And after that year was up, we just kind of said, all right, what are we going to do? Where are we going? And a friend of mine who knew my situation called me and said, did you know that there's an Anglican church here in Cincinnati that's looking for a pastor? And I said, no, I did not know that, actually. And applied for it, and by God's providence was offered the gig. And so we moved back home. But that whole process, like I said, I was in the church for 10 years, all totaled. And, and there were many, many, many issues, not just the ones that I've mentioned. So
it seems to be I'm hearing the undertow over the underthought here of authority and tell us a little about what is the authority of Eastern Orthodox?
Okay, so the authority structure is, so Roman Catholics and Protestants have it easy, okay, because Roman Catholics can say the authority is the magisterium of the church. The Protestants can say sola scriptura. Okay, that's easy. The Orthodox Church is not quite that easy. Because one thing you have to recognize is that the Orthodox Church is not a thing. That doesn't exist. There are only Orthodox churches, national Orthodox churches, that are in communion with each other. Okay? And so in terms of authority, well, what kind of authority are we talking about? Are we talking about doctrinal authority, ecclesiastical authority? Who has the authority to excommunicate who? Those kinds of things. So those are kind of multi-layered issues. Generally speaking, though, if you're talking about doctrinal authority, Protestants like to talk about Catholicism as having the scripture and tradition dichotomy, right? Mm-hmm. Again, that doesn't exist in Orthodoxy. There is only the great tradition, of which Scripture is a part. Okay, they will say that Scripture is the inspired written part of tradition. But tradition as a whole encompasses a whole heck of a lot more than Scripture. So you have Scripture, you have the ecumenical councils and their doctrinal decrees, you have the writings of the church fathers, you have the hymnody of the church, you have the liturgical life of the church. So literally the hymns and the liturgies of the church are seen as sources of authority and of even divine revelation in some cases. Iconography, as I've mentioned, and then there are some who actually, and I wish I was making this up, but there are some who consider church architecture to be a source of even divine inspiration, but certainly of authority. So
when you say authority, there's authority and then there's revelation.
Right.
Is all of this considered revelation, or is just Scripture considered revelation, or it gets messy?
It's all considered revelation, because it's all considered. The great tradition is that which is handed down by the apostles, really, and so as such, it's authoritative, and as such, it's also revealed. They do it because it's been revealed, and it's authoritative because it's revealed.
Now, the Roman Catholics have the magisterium to tell you what part of tradition is, or what tradition is.
Right.
So who does that in Eastern Orthodoxy?
Your guess is as good as mine. Okay. Well, because you get varying things, right? And now there are. I've gotten flack for using this example because people say it's too simplistic or whatever. But the problem is that Orthodoxy is a system. So if you're going to take it, you have to take it all, right? So if tradition is... The problem with tradition is that if it's authoritative, if there's variation in the tradition, then what happens to the authority, right? So the apostle that I'm named after, okay, Matthew the Apostle, an evangelist, okay, there are no less than 3 traditional accounts of his martyrdom. Okay, which one's right? Okay, if this is tradition that's been passed along, which one of those accounts is correct, and which one's the authoritative one? Okay, so something as silly as that calls into question so many other things, because who says what this is? Who says what is the authority? And who is able to say this is the right one? You know. So, for example, on the issue of saints, so one of the arch heretics for modern Orthodoxy is Thomas Aquinas. Okay, I know he's in the Reformed news right now, or whatever, has been for a while. But, whatever. But he's kind of persona non grata in the Orthodox Church. Well, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church considered him a saint for several centuries and venerated him as a saint. So, who's right? Is he a saint? Isn't he a saint? So these kinds of issues really become a problem. Right now, as we speak in the Orthodox Church, and it's been going on for a couple of years, there's a tremendous amount of disagreement and fighting about what the tradition says the role of the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople is. And nobody can agree. In 2016, he tried to call another ecumenical council. He called it a great and holy council. But he tried to call a council, and half the church didn't show up because they didn't recognize his authority. And the only people that showed up were the people who thought that that the tradition gave him that authority. So there is no overarching traditional interpretation and authority that says you must believe this, you must practice this. And it's only in those things that are kind of repetitively done, like the liturgy itself, for example, and the things that are concrete, like the writings of the fathers, that really tell us kind of what the tradition is, or in some sense.
So when you bring this up to the, you were a priest, you bring it up to you,
right.
What was the answer that you give?
Ordinarily, is
it a mystery? Is that
the mystery thing gets thrown around a lot. A lot of times people they punt to mystery. But as a clergyman, as a priest, you have one. If somebody comes to you with something, you have one extra layer for yourself, where you're able to say, I can pass the buck, and that is, I'll check with the bishop and see what he says. And so because ultimately in every diocese, it's whatever the bishop says is what you're going to do. It's what you're going to, so, for me, I couldn't do anything without, liturgically or otherwise, without my bishop's blessing. So every time I had a baptism, every time I was doing a wedding, every time I was doing whatever, outside of the normal Sunday morning, Saturday night services, I had to clear it with the bishop and get his blessing. So everything gets funneled up to his office. So that's really, the bishop is really where the rubber meets the road, with Orthodoxy, honestly, on the ground.
All right. Well, so that's how you got out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how difficult has it been for you to get out of that? How has that impacted you, your family?
It was tough. We more or less, our friends more or less walked away from us. I had somebody call me when I announced my departure, to let me know that I was now on the path to hell, and that I was dragging my children along with me, and those kinds of things. So it's been difficult. The friends that I had in seminary and others. There are a few. I'm not trying to paint a picture of that. I'm trying to paint a picture that we were totally abandoned by everybody and they all hate us. No, there are some that still keep in touch with us, still love us, still contact us and check and see how we're doing, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, it was very difficult. Not long ago, actually, I had a Facebook message out of nowhere from somebody I didn't even know, who sent me a message, and all it said was, priests who depart from the path are as welcome in the church as a dog. That's all it said. So trying to leave the Orthodox Church is, that's seen as a really big deal, because it's seen as the same as abandoning Christ. Because Christ is so identified with the institutional church that if you leave it, you're apostatizing and leaving Christ. So,
and that's interesting to me, because you get the whole kind of like, well, the Eastern Orthodox Church is the church. It's the church. Christ only established one church. That is the church, and yet you just said a few minutes ago there is no such thing as the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Right.
How do you square that?
I honestly don't know. Because it's seen as, the church sort of subsists in Christ, right? And that you are, those bishops that are in communion with him and then in communion with each other, and that constitutes the church, right? So it doesn't really, you'll have people who say, oh yes, there is an Orthodox Church, and then you'll have people who say, oh no, there isn't an Orthodox Church. And so that's just another one of those sort of inconsistencies that you'll see across the board.
All right, well, that's changed gears just a little bit.
Okay.
There seems to be a movement of, I would say, young men converting to Eastern Orthodoxy. What do you think, like, the main attraction is? Why? As I kind of started off the interview, I said a lot of people, young men, I think they're looking for fathers, hungering for fathers.
Absolutely.
We live in a very, what do you want to say, transient world. Not a lot of rootedness. A lot of things are changing. The ground's kind of shaking underneath us. And so, what do you think it is about Eastern Orthodox that maybe attracts these young men?
Well, I think one of the things I actually had some things that I thought up on this. With you. One of the things that you just hit right there was the father hunger thing that I hadn't really considered before. But when you come into Orthodoxy, that word gets thrown around everywhere. Even when you walk into your parish, the guy standing up front, what do you call him? Father. The people that you look to as your authorities to tell you what to believe are the fathers of the church. It's so there is very much this father yearning, and I think some guys find it there. It is normative for most Orthodox Christians to have a spiritual father. So your confessor, what in the West they tend to call a confessor, your spiritual father. I had one. We all had one. I was spiritual father to several people, when I was a priest, so it's that sort of father need is, I think, definitely a part of it. But there's a bunch of different things. And one of those things for young men, I think, is easily identifiable masculine roles, right? Men can be priests, women cannot, those kinds of things. It's very clear in the church. Outside the church, maybe not so much. Because I know most Orthodox people I know outside the church are very egalitarian. But inside the church, not so much. So that's clear. And honestly, I think for guys who are maybe struggling with their masculinity, I think that might be attractive because it says, oh, look, here's a place where there's really clearly defined roles and I can latch onto this and not have to worry so much about it. I can find a sense of my masculinity where the roles are really clearly defined. There's also really clearly outlined praxis. Like, this is what we do. This is what we always do. You show up to church. You know what's expected of you. When you get up and do your morning prayers in your house, you know what's expected of you. The forms don't change. There's that. It's actually one of the things that I think, and this gets pointed out a lot by different people, that one of the things that really attracts men to Orthodoxy is that Orthodoxy actually expects something of you. You don't just come in, warm a pew with your butt for an hour and a half and then go home. There are things you got to do, and the things you got to do can be tough. So in the Orthodox Church, you fast for more than half the year, and you're told what to fast from. So for the 40 days leading up to Easter, 40 days leading up to Christmas, the Apostles' Fast, the Dormition Fast, every Wednesday and Friday through the year, and then on Saturdays or whenever you're getting ready to receive the Eucharist, no meat, fish, wine, dairy, or oil. You're a vegan for half the year. In some of the more
that's pretty masculine.
Yeah, I know, right? But then on Easter, the Greeks are killing and roasting a whole lamb on their front yard. That's pretty cool.
We'll give them that.
I'm not gonna, I ain't gonna, some big tall Greek guy named Spiros with a lamb on a spit in his front yard. I'm not gonna shake I'm not gonna shake my head at that. I'm gonna say, cut me a slice.
Yes, sir.
But there is things that are expected of you. You're expected to make prostrations in your prayers, like during Holy Week, and different times during Lent, especially. You're going to these services and you're doing, sometimes upward of 100 prostrations in a service. You get up and your legs are burning, your back is burning. There's physical things expected of you, and so those are things that are, I think, attractive to some guys. Now this is a little more subjective, but it has an element of beauty about it, or at least beauty is important. And the thing is, I think we were chatting a little bit about that yesterday. That sometimes that can attract the more effeminate minded guys. The more aesthetic things can attract guys that are of a less than masculine demeanor. But I think it also appeals because I don't think that men are quite as utilitarian as they're sometimes portrayed to be. And that can be very evidenced by the fact that we are all much more attracted to objectively beautiful women.
Yeah.
So there is beauty that is a part of what we look for.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the architecture, sometimes I mean, it can take your breath away.
Absolutely.
To look at like a cathedral or the Hagia Sophia or something like that. You know, I think that is. You're right. That's a thing that's attractive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the it took, the Hagia Sophia. I mean, it took guys to build that thing. I mean, this is not, I mean, it took burly, sweaty guys that were, cutting stone by hand. I mean, that was a manly endeavor to build that thing, and to make it beautiful. It was a great manly undertaking that they did. So there's that. One thing that I think some people don't think about, but I think it is important to realize, and especially if you're coming from a clergy perspective, Orthodoxy is very elaborate. To put together any one service requires no fewer than 4 or 5 books to put the service together. And more if it's a Sunday morning or a more elaborate feast or whatever, it may be. So you have to actually, there's a certain level of mastery that it requires to, especially to be in the clergy, to have a mastery over the liturgical life and what goes where and what happens when and all these pieces. So there is that, and I know that is very attractive to many men, because I know for many men, they are disinterested in a lot of evangelical churches because it's just too stinking easy. Come to church, drink my coffee, sing a few songs, and go home. There's nothing that challenges me about that. But the services being elaborate in Orthodoxy can be an attraction to some guys. One of the biggest ones that I hear, and this is partly what attracted me. When I say this, you'll hear my journey in this. And that is that Western and American culture and the Western American churches are largely dying, or becoming woke or becoming liberal, whatever it is. And this is kind of seen as a way to fight back against that.
Yep.
And so I hear that a lot.
It's because there's this aura of unchangeableness, I guess,
Right.
That it's ancient.
Yep.
So how ancient are actually the practices and unchangeable are they? Maybe that's a good question.
Not very, depending on what you're talking about. So, because the question, I think, really is not, oh look, this is 1,500 years old. Oh look, this is 1,600 years old. When the claim is that these practices are apostolic in nature, they have to be 2,000 years old. Okay, and you have to be able to show that what was believed, preached, practiced came from, that spans the breadth of those centuries, and Orthodoxy does not have the cushion that Roman Catholicism does now, thanks to John Henry Newman with the development of doctrine theory. They don't have that. So if the question is, we are the unchanged church, well, you have to actually be able to demonstrate that it is actually, in fact, unchanged in praxis, theology, and piety. And that simply isn't the case. So, for example, liturgical variation. The liturgy that is celebrated today by the Eastern Orthodox Church is 1,500 to 1,600 years old, right? It's still pretty old, but it's not 2,000 years old. And it itself has gone through many revisions. The current form of it is probably 600 years old, maybe even newer than that.
They call it the Chrysostom liturgy, right?
Yeah, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. Yeah.
But how how actually close is it to what John Chrysostom did?
There's not a ton of agreement there, because the reality is it probably, his name probably got attached to it because of some amendments that he made to the liturgy during his lifetime. Kind of in a similar way to how the another name for the old Latin Mass is the liturgy of Saint Gregory the Great. He didn't write that liturgy. He simply made some revisions and carved and shaved off some barnacles. But another big one is the veneration of icons, right? That is huge.
Yep.
When you think of Orthodoxy, you think of icons. And if your audience hasn't seen it, they should go out and they should watch Gavin Ortland's video on icons. He absolutely demolished this idea that icon veneration had any precedent in the ancient patristic period of the church at all. Icon veneration is an imperial Byzantine innovation, full stop. There is literally no evidence that anything remotely like it was practiced before the year 500. And then you the same thing is true of Marian devotions. And I've said before that the Orthodox Church has a veneration of Mary that would make the most traditional ardent Roman Catholic blush.
Wow.
And those are things that you do not see them in the first 500 years of the church. You will scour in vain in the early patristic writings to try to find any mention of her beyond what's said in the Chalcedonian definition, and things like that, or just a blanket statement that Christ was born of a virgin. So those things, these traditions are not 2,000 years old. It's not unchanged. And what a lot of people will fall back to is they will fall back to what they call the consensus of the fathers. And you will hear people say, the fathers say this, or the fathers say that, and use that as a justification for sort of this unchanging character of the church. Well, the problem is you can walk up to a shelf and pull any two church fathers off the shelf on the same topic, and they won't agree. Outside of more or less basic Nicene orthodoxy, the church fathers don't actually agree on that much. There are opinions all over the spectrum. So the idea of a patristic consensus that justifies an unchanging institutional church is just not the case.
You've been an Eastern Orthodox priest.
Mm-hmm.
You've kind of already hinted at this. This is kind of going along with this. Getting back to the masculine aspect of it.
Sure.
How much, the Orthobros on the line, how much of what they're pushing is reality?
Oh, man. Well,
and has feminism impacted Eastern Orthodox?
Yes, it has. Okay. As far as the Orthobros, a lot of the Orthobros are largely converts. I went to a seminary that was in the Russian tradition, and we called them the Konvertsky Dox. And you see these guys when they show up to school, they stop cutting their hair, they stop trimming their beards, they when they make the sign of the cross, it has to be as big as possible, and all this kind of stuff. And the way that I can describe, and I went through some of this too, but I had the benefit. A lot of these guys don't have this benefit. I had the benefit of being married and having a wife who wasn't Orthodox yet, who was saying, calm yourself, but, Orthobros, Konvertsky Dox, convert Orthodox single young men, are like cage stage Calvinists on crack with Red Bull running into their veins. They can be really obnoxious. Really, really obnoxious. And ultimately what it comes down to is really there's this sense of almost wanting to be a monastic without being a monastic. Because in the Orthodox world, there's no higher calling than to be a monk, really, if it really boils down to it. And so I've known a lot of these guys in my life, even married guys, who just desperately want to be monk. And so they're going to live like one. But
it's kind of like LARPing then, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of what they put out there, a lot of times what you're going to get is the most extreme views on everything, just kind of put out there as the mainstream Orthodox view on everything. Which, I mean, is no different than, a cage stage Calvinist guy who, without realizing it, is putting, everything is actually hyper Calvinism, and, they need to be pulled back a little bit, right? But there's not a whole lot of correction that happens with some of these guys, unfortunately. And a lot of times you have guys like me who were, somewhat Orthobros, and then they think, oh, I'm a convert, I found the Orthodox Church, I have to go to seminary. I have to pursue ordination, and I have to do all this. And so that happens quite a bit. But in terms of the feminism question, I mentioned earlier that, in the church itself, it is, you might even say patriarchal in a sense. I mean, because, in the great churches, the great national churches, that's the name that is given to the chief bishop, the patriarch. The Patriarch of Constantinople, the Patriarch of Moscow, so forth and so on. But on the ground, at least, and everything I say here is from my experience, okay? So,
Yeah, sure.
do your own research, but I experienced an enormous amount of egalitarianism, of effeminacy, either married clergy, married laymen, even a lot of monks, who were very effeminate. A lot of the men were led by their wives and not leading their wives. And so orthodoxy itself is not a, it's not a magic wand to make men men. As I think some guys maybe think it is, because they see these guys walking around in long black robes with Gandalf beards they can tuck into their belt, singing, Russian chant, in tones that will rattle the floorboards, and they think that's what orthodoxy is. It isn't. That's what you see. That's what's put out there, but it's once you actually get into a parish, once you actually get into everyday life, it's a very different animal.
Okay, how does, speaking of that, how does the Eastern view of truth, mystery, how does that impact masculinity compared to the Reformed view?
Well, I would say, and this is a little bit difficult to answer, because, again, the Orthodox view of mystery is mystery. But you will hear a lot that if you have questions about certain things in the Orthodox Church, if you, like, for example, when I went and asked my question about praying for the dead that I mentioned earlier, and I was mentioning that it didn't make sense to me because there wasn't a purgatory, the answer that I was given was, you're thinking like a Westerner. So stop thinking like a Westerner. My response was, I am a Westerner, and I live in a Western country, in a Western society. Stop punting to stop thinking like a Westerner. We have to actually answer these questions at some point, because of the culture that we're living in and we're ministering in. But in reality, Westerners, and I think we Reformed guys excel at this better than anybody, as evidenced by all my systematic theologies that I have over here, we think in a very linear fashion. This truth leads to this truth, leads to this truth, leads to this truth, right? And we can see a succession of truth, a succession of logic that gets us to our end goal, right? And Brian Chappell has actually had a really helpful thing on this, where he talks about how in the East, the way to get to truth is to talk around the truth so that you get to it. So it's not linear. It's very circular. And so they approach it by talking around it. So the way you get to the truth is that you liturgize about it, and then you sing about it, and then you read the scripture about it, and then you see what the fathers say about it. And all of these things work in this sort of swirled fashion to kind of run together in the middle to create this truth. Well, the thing is, especially for us here in the West, we don't naturally think that way. We are people who are linear and who are, give me my logical bam, 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 bam. And at least in my experience, that's how most men I know want things laid out. I don't want to have to sit here and listen to somebody talk around, because we call that beating around the bush. When those things happen to me, I instantly hear the crowds from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Get on with it.
Yeah.
So just say what you mean what you say, and move on with it. So a good example of this, at the end of every Orthodox liturgy, with the exception of the Sunday morning services, but at the end of every service, there's a line that the priest has to say. He has to chant it out loud. And that line is, Most Holy Theotokos, Most Holy Mother of God, save us. Okay? Now, on its face, I had when I was a priest, I had guys come who were from a Presbyterian perspective, whatever. They come to the whole service, everything's good to go. I get 2 seconds before the end of the service, and I say, Most Holy Mother of God, save us. And those guys turn around and walk out and never come back again, right? And with good reason, right? Because that's heresy. But if you look into what the Orthodox say about it, they will give you page after page after page after page after nuance after nuance after nuance of what that little phrase actually is attempting to say. Whereas a Westerner, I'm saying, well, why can't you just say something else? Right? If what you mean is not Most Holy Mother of God, save us, why say Most Holy Mother of God, save us? It's still problematic theology, but even Most Holy Mother of God, pray for us would be better than Most Holy Mother of God, save us. So that's really the issue. Is theology is not done in a straightforward way. The other issue is that the way that they get at truth is through negation. It's called apophatic theology. And what they believe is that anything you say about God is going to necessarily fall short of the mark. So therefore, we can't actually say anything affirmative about God. So all we can say about him is by negation. So the only way to do theology is by saying what he isn't, essentially. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of getting at it, but that's basically the idea. So, but the problem is, that's a struggle to do anything purely by negation. And I struggle with the idea that you can't say anything true about God simply because your language is limited. I mean, he gave us the Bible. Mm-hmm. He gave us his word, which is written in human language, in order to express who he is. God is the Lord, and he has revealed himself to us. How has he revealed himself to us? In Scripture. And the Scripture is filled with positive affirmations about who God is. So I think that those things, at least for me as a man, and I don't know about your guys, you guys that are watching, or your audience, but for me, having to work around issues is, for me, the more masculine way is to just state what you have to say and move on with it. Speak the truth and move on. And so for me, and again, I realize there are cultural things at play here. I'm speaking specifically for Western men who are approaching Eastern Orthodoxy, to ask the question, what is the attraction if this is the way that you think as a Western modern man? Isn't it better just to get to it, get to what's actually being said, get to the truth, not have to dance around it in order to get to it? But then in terms of mystery, right? Everything kind of is a mystery, right? In fact, in the Eastern Church, they don't call the sacraments, they call them the great mysteries. And so everything has this mysterious character to it that you can't really know entirely. But mystery also gives way to mysticism, which is an entirely different subject for another day.
Yeah. Two more questions.
Yeah.
What are the main dangers in Eastern Orthodoxy? I mean, you left it, so main dangers, especially as we think of these men trying to get into it.
Right.
What's the danger?
Well, the first thing I would say is that as you're looking at all of these, and the biggest primary danger is as you're looking at all these things, you're looking at a denial of penal substitution, or at least a downplaying of it. You're looking at prayers to the saints. You're looking at all of these things that are anti-scriptural. Requirement for veneration of icons, which is a violation of the second commandment. All of these things. Really, what you're looking at is a system where the gospel is virtually absent. It's there if you look for it, but it's really heavily obscured by all of these other elements, all these other things. And so the biggest danger is that you got to dig and dig and dig to actually find the gospel. And you should be able to walk into any church on any Sunday morning and see the gospel presented to you clear as day. One of the things, I'm an Anglican. One of the things that I love about the prayer book is that the 1662 Book of Common Prayer was called by one liturgical theologian the only successful attempt in history to encapsulate the doctrine of sola fide as a liturgy. Right? So, and that's one of the things I love about it. So you should be able to walk in, hear the gospel, see it presented unambiguously, without the tiniest shadow of a doubt of what is believed, what's being taught, and that Christ is being glorified. That is the number one. That's the number one danger. The other thing, and I haven't talked about this yet, but is the issue of the extreme exclusivity, okay, of the church, because they believe that they're the church, and they believe in the doctrine of no salvation outside the church, right? So, they'll downplay this, but on paper, that is what they believe. The canons of the ecumenical councils actually say that you're not supposed to pray with heretics. Well, they consider non-Orthodox people heretics. So the question that I usually ask people, that I'll ask young men when they come to me, and I will say to them, are you prepared to say that your godly Baptist grandmother who led you to Jesus is outside of the grace of Christ? If you're not prepared to say that, then you need to not become Orthodox. But if you are prepared to say that, by all means, go ahead. And those are probably two of the biggest dangers, I would say.
All right, final question here. What can Reformed, you're Anglican, I'm Presbyterian, what can we be doing? Is there things that we can learn from Eastern Orthodox in particular as far as capturing these young men?
Absolutely.
Bring them in the gospel.
Yeah.
What are the things that we can learn?
So, and this is going to sound really strange because a lot of times when people are making an argument or something against something, they like to begin with all the good things that they learned from it up front, and then I'm doing the reverse of that. I'm going to say the good things about Eastern Orthodoxy now. Okay.
Okay, sure.
The things that I took away from Eastern Orthodoxy that I still take away is the reverence for worship. Right. When you come before God's presence, you are coming to something that is completely other than you're doing the other 6 days of the week. Okay? You're coming into a space that is used for no other purpose than to worship God. This is not a space where you're coming in to have social time or to pick up chicks or whatever it is. This is you are coming in here to worship the almighty triune God of the universe. And that's huge because the Orthodox are nothing if not Trinitarian. You hear the Trinity all over the place, right? There is beauty. There is seriousness. The Orthodox liturgy is not something that has a great deal of levity to it. You are there to worship God and you take it seriously. And that's something that I think we really need to learn because I think the Reformed tradition had that at one point and had it for a long time. It's only in the last century or so that we've gotten a little bit flippant and maybe a little too casual about our approach. And it doesn't have anything to do with what you wear to church or if you stand there with a coffee cup in your hands. It's about the attitude that we encourage people to have when they come to worship and what they're doing in the church building itself. Are you coming in with a quiet, expectant heart? Are you coming in having prepared your heart to receive the sacrament if you're having the Lord's Supper that day? Have you asked the Lord to prepare your heart to receive the word that's going to be preached? Are you leading your family in family worship every day? These things are things that the Orthodox take seriously, and we tend not to. The other thing, and I gave a talk about this at a Reformation Day event this past year, and I encouraged the folks at this church. The Reformation tradition, and by that I mean the whole Reformation tradition, whether continental or British. The Reformation tradition, in and of itself, is a beautiful and deep well of a tradition. Do not simply allow for, as Carl Trueman says, don't let tulip be all there is. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The 5 points of Calvinism, that's great and it's true, but it's not all there is. We have beautiful confessional traditions. You guys are Westminster, I'm sure, right? So the Westminster standards are beautiful. The reformational liturgical tradition, whether notice I say reformational, not reformed, because you can throw the Lutherans into that too. Whether it's Lutheran or Anglican or old Scottish Presbyterian or whatever. I mean, these are beautiful. The German Reformed tradition, beautiful liturgical traditions. And so, we want people to know that liturgical beauty and liturgical piety, deep-rooted worship practices, are not the exclusive parlance of traditional Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. And we want to express that to people. But also, one of the things, and I taught this on Sunday school on Sunday at a church I was supplying at, one of the things that we have neglected, that the Orthodox do probably better than anybody, is encouraging individual devotion to the spiritual disciplines. Whether that's Bible reading, prayer, fasting, what they call almsgiving, all of these spiritual disciplines that we've been asked to do by the Lord, or at least implied that we're going to do them, are neglected. And so the Orthodox put these things out there as these are how you live the Christian life. You fast and you pray and you give money to the poor and you come and you participate in the sacraments. And it's like that doesn't belong just to them. Those are biblical things that we're commanded to do. And we on the Reformed end of things have really dropped the ball. And so we need to express to our men, like, listen, guys, things are expected of you here too. And we have a theology that glorifies God more than any other system of theology that's ever been put together. So put those two things together. Put together a rich historical and liturgical tradition, a deep, biblical, robust, biblical theology that glorifies God, and spiritual disciplines that call men to be men. And I think you get those three things together, and we keep our guys.
Amen. Well, hey, brother, it has been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, brother.
If our listeners wanted to reach out to you, they had more questions, how might they get in contact with you?
I'm on Facebook. That's about all I got right now. You can also find my church plants Facebook, Reformation Anglican Church, Westchester, Ohio. You can find that on Facebook, and I'll answer things there. You can also shoot me an email if you want. I can give you an email to put in the email address to put in the show notes if you like. I respond to things that way. But generally, I'm on social media. I'm fairly easy to find. So,
all right, brother. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Outside the religious sites in Jerusalem, there were many vendors selling religious wares. They love to invite you into their store. They're like, come in, and it's free to look. And then they find you something that you like, and they won't hardly let you out of the store. They often start off asking for $600 for something. And then when you're like, no, I'm not paying that, then they're like, I like you. I give you a good deal. I'm an honest man. I have the best of all of Jerusalem. You want old coins? I have a widow's mite. We can make a deal, friend. We can. And so they just, in fact, in one store, they took something that I was looking at, put it in a bag, wrapped it up, and gave it to me and said, "This is a gift. It's a gift. Only for this price." And then after you negotiate and you walk out of the store, and then it's this whole deal where you finally get it down to the price that you want. Anyways, they would sell these old-looking coins. And now I'm a sucker for history and ancient things. In fact, I found, don't tell anybody, I found a piece of the Church of the Sepulchre that was kind of falling off, and I took a part of it and brought it to my house. And so now I have a piece of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a little rock. I didn't steal it. It was just a little rock kind of hanging there. Anyways, it would have been really cool to own some coins from the time of Christ. The problem is that in the 15th and 20th century, there were a ton of false shekels produced in Europe. So from the 15th to the 20th century, just a lot of old-looking shekels. They were to be pilgrim mementos, but often made to really look old, and so they can be very deceptive. They look old, they look warm, and when you see them in these shops, you just think, man, this have to have been from ancient times. This would have had to have been, maybe Jesus held these coins. Maybe it was the coin found in the fish or whatever. But the problem is they aren't. They're not as old as you think they are. They have the appearance of something that has withstood the test of time, but they're just fake. And so these vendors get a lot of people to choke up money for them. You buy it thinking you found a treasure, and later find out that it's less than 100 years old. Or maybe if you're really lucky, 500 years old. But not to the time of Christ. Friends, Eastern Orthodoxy is the same way. There's some good things to say about it. I love the aesthetic. I like the sound of their chants, and it is challenging. There were some things that Matthew Joyner told us about how they challenge men, and as Reformed Christians, we need to maybe learn some of these lessons. But ultimately, much of the practices that they say are ancient are actually far newer than you realize. Worse than that, though, many of their practices are a departure from the faith given once for all to the saints. The main problem is it doesn't have the gospel given by the apostles, and therefore it lacks life. It's a counterfeit to what men really need. Because what men need is the gospel of Christ. That is what will withstand time. That gospel is what upholds the church that the gates of hell cannot prevail against. What men need is the Holy Scriptures as their highest authority. They need a faithful local church with men who lead according to the Word. They need the people who actually cared about the church fathers and what they taught, which is the reformers, right? It was the Protestant reformers who spent time translating and studying the ancient fathers because they wanted to go back to the sources. It wasn't the Roman Catholics or the Orthodox. They just were consumed with the medieval sources. But it was the reformers who wanted to go back. It was the reformers who reformed family life and restored the patriarchy. John Knox's first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women is more base than anything Eastern Orthodox has to offer. It's the Reformed faith who has a warrior God who pursues his people, conquers his enemies, and overcomes even the will of sinners. It has a Savior who took the wrath of God to atone for sin. After my interview with Pastor Joyner, he sent me a message saying that he left one thing out that he thought was so important. He just wasn't sure how to say it. And this is what he said, quote, "I was really struggling to find a way to say that one of the big reasons that I departed from Orthodox theology is because, frankly, their depiction of God makes him a weakling. It's an emasculated religion because they have an emasculated view of God. God, in their view, can't do anything for you at the end of the day. All he did was create a path to gain his acceptance, which is ultimately a list of chores like fast, go to church, pray. It's just like a honey-do list. But it's all up to you to pursue him. God takes the feminine role of the pursued rather than the pursuer. It's like in the old days when a man wanted a wife, he had to pursue her, do all these things to court her, work to build a house for her, and only then did he receive the reward of actually having her. And that is what salvation by asceticism is. That is the salvation that Eastern Orthodoxy gives you. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Patriarchy Podcast. If you watch this on YouTube, subscribe. Click the bell to get notified of the latest episodes. Click like and share with all your friends. Until next time, if you've not yet bowed your knee to Christ, now is the time. Repent and believe. And if you have, this is our call as men. Build, fight, protect, and lead. This is the Patriarchy.